Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Leadership Development Training Series. This is part 2 on housing court and the eviction process. If you haven't seen it yet, we did do a part 1 all about tenants' rights. So we really encourage you to go back and watch that if you have time. They're related to each other. So yeah, check it out for more information. But this training, what we're going to talk about right now, is housing court and the eviction process. We're going to do that by first introducing ourselves, who we are, going through the purpose of the training, talk about evictions and the legal process of evictions. Then we're going to move on to talk about what are illegal evictions and how can you identify them. And we're going to discuss tenant harassment. We're going to discuss housing court, and we're also going to discuss the resources that are out there for folks who need support in the housing court process. We'll finish up by doing some next steps, and let's move forward. Okay. My name is Amy Blumsack. I'm the Director of Organizing and Policy in the Community Action Program. At Neighbors Together, we have 3 programs. We have our community cafe where we serve hot meals 5 days a week. We have our empowerment program where we provide direct services and support for people searching for housing, particularly those people who are searching with vouchers. And our community action program is where we involve our members in grassroots community organizing and legislative and policy advocacy, because we know that people who have lived the experiences of being homeless or are formerly homeless in New York City know best what the changes are that the city needs to make in order to support everyone to have access to safe, dignified, truly affordable permanent housing. So that is what the Community Action Program does. We would love to have you join us at one of our future meetings, and we will discuss that at the end. But I would like to throw it to my colleague, Nailah, to introduce herself. Go ahead, Nailah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nailah Abdul-Mubdi, and I'm the community organizer at the Community Action Program, short for CAP. Upon joining us, you will be in contact with me, build a relationship, and learn more about you and how you could, advocate for yourself and advocate for legislation to keep you housed in New Yorkers' house. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Nailah. And then we have our third colleague, Devonte Tate, who's also a community organizer with us. And if you get involved, you'll definitely be talking to him too. I do want to say up at the top that if you have any questions regarding this training, information that we share, or just questions in general related to our housing advocacy, housing justice work, please feel free to email us at communityaction@neighborstogether.org. Okay, so why are we here? What are we doing? The goal of this training is to equip community members with the knowledge, confidence, and resources to avoid illegal lockouts or illegal evictions, and to understand how to navigate housing court and the eviction process. Nailah, I'm going to toss it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So now we're going to talk about housing court. And what is housing court? So housing court is basically where civil proceedings are handled between landlords and tenants regarding any housing disputes. And we will go more about what the housing disputes are. Next slide. So landlords and tenants handle the following disputes in housing court. So one would be non-payment. Non-payment meaning basically, you're behind rent. So in this case, landlord must send a rent notice via certified mail if rent is more than 5 days late. So if the rent remains unpaid, they must serve a 14-day rent demand letter, giving the tenant exactly 14 days to pay the rent balance in full. Next is the holdover case, or known as non-lease renewals. And this is when landlords decides not to renew a lease and want to evict the tenant for other reason other than paying rent. So example would be a lease violation or any lease terms that was violated, that was in the lease. So that's very important for you to read your lease and know what you are obligated to follow. And also the notice window depends on how long the tenant have lived there. So if you've been living in your apartment for under 1 year, the landlord must give you 30 days advance notice. If it's between 2 years, the landlord must give 60 days advance notice. And over 2 years is 90 days advance notice. So advance notice should be when a landlord just give you a notice basically stating that they do not want to renew your lease, and also follow with the reasons why, and it have to be justifiable. Also, housing court proceeding, also known as HP actions, which is a lawsuit filed by the tenant to force the landlord to make repairs or stop harassment. HP cases are strictly about living conditions and harassment. So part one, this is where we talk about, part one, we talk about the tenant blacklist, where we shared that some landlords, when they want to rent to a prospective tenant, they look and see if a tenant been in housing court. So as we shared, when on the tenant blacklist that landlords, check the background of prospective tenants, they do not see if a tenant has been to housing court for whatever reason. So in this case, if a tenant was taking their landlord to court, it was because of repairs wasn't made, and follow up with basically a letter was sent. So the paperwork and the paper trail, which helped from the justfixit.org, will also lead you into helping you file for, an HP action in court for repairs. And lastly is illegal lockout case. Now, this is another case that is filed by the tenant against the landlord who has illegally locked out of the apartment and demanding the judge to force the landlord to let them back in their home immediately. Next slide. Eviction. And what is it? Eviction is a legal process where a tenant can be removed after a landlord goes to housing court and obtains a judgment of possession of the unit. And that's very important, and we will discuss more about what that is. So a housing court judge makes a decision on a court case. A warrant of eviction is issued, and an official city marshal or sheriff must serve a formal notice before any removal happens. Next slide. So here is the legal process of eviction. So there are steps that landlords must follow to legally evict a tenant. So if any of these steps has been skipped, anything, you can fight to stay in your unit. Okay, so the eviction process follows a strict timeline. So as I shared, if any landlord skips any of the steps, a tenant can use that failure as a legal defense to get the case dismissed in court. So step one of the eviction legal process is landlord sends a rent demand letter, basically saying, you owe back rent and it needs to be paid. Step two, which is a pre-court written notice, is within the 14-90 days, depending on the case type. So if it's, due to back rent, an eviction notice, it's not a court order, and you do not have to leave. It's just basically a warning to notify the tenant that they have violated the terms due to unpaid rent and will be taken to court if the issue isn't fixed. So the notice gives a deadline to fix the issue, whether, a deadline when to pay the back rent. Next slide, going into step 3. So step 3 is the notice of petition to housing court. So this notice is served within 10 to 17 days before the court appearance, if the issue wasn't been corrected regarding to the eviction notice or demand to pay rent. So the detail of the notice of petition to housing court includes date and time and room of the court hearing and explaining why the landlord is suing. It cannot be served by the landlord himself or herself, and it must be delivered by a process server or third party. And also, respond to the notice right away and confirm the court date with the court clerk at the housing court. And also, be sure to reference the index number for your case. And do not forget to inquire about legal representation, because that's very important, okay? And step 4 is the housing court appearance. So depending on the case, there are different things that can happen. So first, we're going to address right to adjournment or extensions. And this normally happens during the first appearance, and you have the right to ask the judge to postpone the case, to find legal counsel, or gather evidence. Or you could say, Your Honor, I would like to exercise my right to counsel. And then from then on, you would get an adjournment date. Settlement and stipulation. So before going to trial, you will meet with the court attorney or the landlord's lawyer to see if a settlement can be reached. Example would be paying back rent and make repairs. But however, you will have legal representation. But also I want to clarify that if you experience in the past or want to represent yourself when you are being addressed with the landlord's attorney to sign the stipulation, it feels intimidating, because once you sign that stipulation, it's basically saying that you agreed to pay whatever agreement that you may have on this date or whenever y'all come back to court. So just be mindful that if you sign that stipulation, that you're agreeing to whatever payments you made upon the next court date and things of that nature. If not, you will waive your rights as, staying in your home, and also, I forgot what I was going to say, but also just, again, make sure you have legal representation, because it's the stipulation, the attorney landlord could be pressuring, and you feel like you have to make a decision right away, and you feel like you're under duress. Please get legal representation. In the stipulation, you do not have to agree to it if you know you cannot basically meet the agreements to it. And lastly is the trial. So if agreement cannot be made upon the stipulation or the settlement by both sides, evidence can be presented to the judge to make a final decision. So it's up to the judge that's presiding over the case to make a final decision on what the court case will be. Next slide. Okay, and here we have an example of a housing court petition. So in this image here, it is an image of a letter that you received from housing court, and also for you to know that the landlord has taken you to housing court. So on the left, you would see the civil court of whatever county you live in on the top left, followed by the petitioner, which would be the landlord who's petitioning you to court, or the plaintiff, and followed by the respondent, which would be you. The landlord is suing to court. And then the address, and have your name and address and things of that nature. And then we're gonna go to the right. And as you see, some of the things here is redacted, but on the top right, there is an index number. And the index number will indicate your court case and what's happening. So this is where you will share your index number if you are seeking legal representation in the housing court. So, when you meet with a legal representation in the housing court, they would, ask you basic information. But what's important is an index number, and that's the number that you will provide for them, and they can see everything what's happening here. And then as you go in the middle here, it just states everything that, far as eviction, what's happening, and all that, all those things there. And then, of course, your private information, which is redacted here. So yeah, so this is what a housing court looks like, and this is what it means to be petitioned to court, and this is where you have to respond at the city clerk office and get a calendar date. Next slide. Oh, and step 5 is a judgment and warrant of eviction. So if the judge rules in favor of the landlord, he or she would sign the warrant of eviction. So if a tenant does not show to court or defaults, meaning that, you just waive your rights at this point, the judge will rule in the landlord's favor after trial, if it was sent to trial. So therefore, the court will issue a judgment of possession, and which means that landlords gets legal rights to apartment. And a warrant of eviction is authorizing the marshal to remove the tenant. And step 6 is the 14-day marshal notice. And after the warrant eviction has been authorized, the marshal notice is served, and it gives the final formal warning period before the landlord gets possession of the unit. So once you get that notice, you can call the marshal office to find out what day they are coming. And also there's a number that that can indicate, the landlord will ask, like, what's the number? What's the number on the notice? And with that number, they can indicate, basically everything that's happening and what day they are, or what day they are coming to actually execute the eviction. So when the marshal comes to evict, they will display the warrant to evict, do any forced entry if they have to, and change the lock. But however, it doesn't stop there. You still have the power to stop the eviction and stay in your home. So within that 14-day period, you can stop the eviction by paying the rent owed by going to housing court again and obtaining an order to show cause. And what order to show cause is a request to tell the housing court to stop the eviction, and the marshal and landlord will be notified to go back in court. So once you do the order to show cause, the ball is in your court. You hold the power. And yeah, next step.
Okay.
Take it away, Amy.
Okay, great. I'm actually I'm gonna pause and go back one slide and just say, thank you, Nailah, for walking us through each of those steps. And I just want to reiterate that a couple things. These steps have to happen as the legal process for eviction. Only a housing court judge can decide if you will be evicted from your home. That is the legal process of eviction. A landlord can't decide to evict you. It has to be approved by a housing court judge, and it has to follow the steps that we just outlined. I think a thing that we see a lot that's really common is that when people get their written notice. So after you get your rent demand letter where the landlord says you owe back rent, you have to pay it by such and such a time. Then let's say you can't and you don't, then they send the next, the written notice. You have 30 days or 14 days or whatever, however many days you have to do X, Y, or Z thing. Normally, often it's like pay the back rent, or I'm going to take, or you have to evict. We'll be taking the premises back. Those letters can be really scary and really intimidating, and they can sound really official. And obviously, it's very stressful to receive a letter like that from your landlord. It's very stressful to owe back rent and feel like your housing is very precarious. Um, it's so important to understand, do not self evict. The written notices can have all kinds of scary language in it. Doesn't matter what the written notice says. That's just the notice that's telling you that your landlord will take you to housing court if you don't do the thing that they're saying you need to do. For example, pay back rent. But as you've seen from what Nailah just walked us through, the housing court process is long and involved. So you have to get the first official notice from housing court, the petition, right? That was the document that Nailah showed you. That is just the very first piece of paper that says the ball is rolling. It's official. Now the housing court process has begun, but your date for court has to be scheduled. You can ask for an adjournment or a postponement, to gather more evidence or get representation, which you absolutely should get legal representation. So there's a number of steps. There's often more than one court date in housing court. So, when you self-evict, when you say, "Oh, for like, this is too scary or this is too stressful, I'm just going to leave," you're denying yourself all the extra time that you might get by going through the actual housing court process. And in the housing court process, you might come to an agreement that's, okay to you or favorable to you. You might be able to postpone long enough that you'll, get some sort of alternative solution that you didn't know about. So I cannot stress enough, do not self-evict. Make sure that your landlord is taking you through the housing court process, and make sure that you go through the housing court process. The other thing that I wanted to say is that, this can feel very scary, and it's a very heavy and very stressful process to be taken to housing court and go through all of this, that Nailah just outlined. We ran this training with some of our members recently, and one of our members made such an important point, which is that even though it's really scary and it feels very heavy, don't give up hope. It is true that when you're starting the housing court process or before you're taken to housing court, you might not have access to resources that can help you. But once you're in the official housing court process, or maybe even once you have the official warrant of eviction judgment issued against you, you might then be eligible for resources that you weren't eligible for earlier, right? So maybe that's, maybe you're suddenly eligible for a rental assistance voucher now that you are officially in housing court and have an eviction case. So it's really, really important to not despair and to understand that it's, there are all of these steps that have to happen, and there are processes that can be put in place to potentially help you depending on the circumstances of your situation. Is there anything, Nailah, that I missed on that you want to add?
No, you covered it. You brought us home.
Okay. Okay, great. So that is the eviction process. There's this whole other type of eviction that is not legal. These are illegal evictions, and they are unfortunately very common in New York City and many other places. So an illegal eviction is when an eviction happens that was not ordered by a housing court judge and not executed by a city marshal. A landlord cannot evict you on their own. They cannot remove you or your belongings without a warrant of eviction and a city marshal executing that warrant of eviction. So an illegal eviction can look like more than one thing, right? I think the most obvious thing that it can look like is changing the locks, right? If you've ever been in the horrible situation of an illegal lockout, it's like you come home to your apartment and suddenly your key doesn't work in the door, right? So that's an illegal eviction. Let's say, like, maybe the entrance has been blocked off, or maybe your door has been removed, right? Like, these all count as forms of illegal evictions. Another form of illegal eviction that qualifies is shutting off utilities. So purposely cutting off heat or hot water, gas or electricity, the goal of which is usually almost always to make the apartment so unlivable and so miserable that you choose to self-evict, right? That you say, I'm leaving, and then the landlord doesn't have to take you to housing court. They circumvent the whole legal process and they scare you off. So that counts as an illegal eviction. We really want to avoid that happening. And then failure to make repairs also counts as an illegal eviction. So purposely not making repairs to your apartment so that you feel compelled to leave for your own safety also qualifies as a form of illegal eviction. So in our part one of this training, we talked about exercising your tenants' rights. We talked about letters for requesting repairs to your landlord, or filing a complaint for repairs, or bad conditions through 311, being able to look at the HPD building info website and see, have my complaints been registered? Have they been addressed or not? If after going through all those steps, there's still no repairs being done, you can pretty much assume that your landlord is either being negligent or purposely trying to get you out of your apartment. And so you should consider that it counts as an illegal lockout. And as Nailah just said, you can take your landlord to court for an HP action to force them to make repairs. So all of these things fall under sort of the umbrella of tenant harassment, right? Which is a pattern of behavior by your landlord or property manager or people related to them or, connected to them to intimidate you into exiting your unit, forcing you out of your home, or, having you surrender your lease rights. So it can look like the things we just named. It can also really look like some other scary behaviors like using threats, intimidation, obscene language. We have many members, unfortunately, who have been harassed in this way. People who are either the landlord or the landlord's family or shady whomevers who just show up and are like constantly threatening you, right? About you need to leave or else. That's definitely tenant harassment. Like ongoing, incessant contacting you about, let me buy you out. We want, if you move out, we'll give you this kind of money, da 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 da. That's also harassment. If you're gonna make a settlement with your landlord to move out, make them do it through the housing court process. It's gonna go, that's gonna help follow the legal process, and that kind of negotiation, if it's right for you, can be done in housing court. Not offering you a lease renewal, trying to get you to waive your tenants' rights, trying to get you to move, destroying your things, putting your things out on the streets, lying to you. All of these things count as tenant harassment. Again, like excessive construction, noise, failure to make repairs, all those kinds of things count as tenant harassment. And they're all ways that landlords try to get their tenants to leave so that they can save the money and time of having to go to housing court, unfortunately. There are things that you can do. First, I want to say that people have fought a long time and very hard to get the right to counsel in New York City. So due to this fight, we now have the right to counsel in New York City by law. So eligible folks who meet the criteria are able to get free legal representation in housing courts. And it is important to say that right to counsel is available to anyone, regardless of your immigration status. So when you receive your court date, you want to ask for an attorney or ask for the right to counsel intake at the courthouse. It's really, really important to get an attorney to represent you. There's other resources that you can get and should use if you find yourself in the eviction process. Housing Court Answers is a really great resource. They have an actual desk in housing court. They also have a website and an intake number that you should contact, and they can help you with a variety of different things. There's also Homebase. Homebase can help you with things to prevent you from losing your home. So for example, a one-shot deal. You can go to Homebase for help to pay back rent, called a one-shot deal. You can also sometimes go to Homebase and get a voucher. You have to meet the criteria to be eligible for the voucher, but you might meet those criteria and then you can get a voucher to stay and help you cover back rent or help you cover ongoing rent payments. And this list right here is a list of all of the different legal service providers who participate in the Right to Counsel program. And you'll see it's broken out by borough. So, if you live in the Bronx, these are the organizations that are going to help do right to counsel and represent people in housing court. Here's Brooklyn, here's the orgs, here's their contact info, here's their website. So definitely, please take a look at these resources if you find yourself in that kind of a situation. Anything you want to add, Nailah?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it. Nailah, do you want to do next steps?
Yes. So thank you, Amy, for sharing all the important info. And also, please do not voluntarily leave the unit or self-evict. Yeah, so for next steps, again, we have upcoming social housing town hall meeting, which is this Wednesday at 6:30, 8 p.m., where we would be discussing basically social housing development authority in New York State, and for it to be, of course, under the law that's been introduced under the New York State Senate, it will provide deeply affordable housing, democratically controlled by its tenants, and also building up power and just to push for and pass social housing in New York State. So we will be having a meeting to discuss things about social housing, of course. And also Thursday, August 20th, which is our Value Housing meeting, which VALUE stands for, is an acronym for Voucher Advocates Lifting Up Equity in housing. So this is our monthly meeting where we would discuss everything on housing vouchers in New York City. So please join us on Zoom. And Wednesday, August 26th, 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., we will have our social housing town hall meeting for the month of August. And again, Neighbors Together will be closed Monday, August 31st to Monday, September 8th. And we will be reopened on Tuesday, September 9th. So thank you all for joining and, watching our training on eviction process and tenant rights. I hope this training gave you major insights and also a tool to exercise your right and also empower you. Okay, so again, thank you for joining us. Amy,
Thank you so much, everyone. No, thank you so much, everyone. I'll just say that if you have any questions or want to reach out to us, to discuss a situation you or a loved one might be in, you can email us at communityaction@neighborstogether.org. And yes, if you are seeing this after August is over, you can find our upcoming meetings on our website, which is www.neighborstogether.org. There is a calendar with all of our upcoming meetings, and we would love to have you join us. And we're building power together for a more just housing system in New York City and New York State, and we want you to be a part of that with us. Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your time.